I'm grateful to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you this morning. I always try to make it to this important event that we have a couple of times a year so that I can actually have a chance to connect with all of you in a large group. I do have a chance to see some of you throughout the year at different places and spaces, but it's nice to actually see you all together and to connect where we left off the last time. So there are two key messages I wanted to share today. One is the continuation of the work that we've been doing for the last number of years regarding our vision, our multi-year strategic plan, and the work ahead. And I'm happy to report that that work continues to grow and to deepen. I see clear evidence of the focus that exists throughout the Toronto District School Board and the impact that that focus is having on our students and our families. And certainly that is something I want to spend a little bit of time on. And I also need to spend that time in the context of what's going on around us. I'm guessing that everyone in our system, certainly those of you here in this room, are wondering about what impact all of these announcements that are coming from our government may have. And though unfortunately I probably will not have as much information as you would like at this point because of where we are in the process, I will explain to you exactly where we are, what we're working on, and what the plan is going forward in terms of the significant work we have to do in light of some of the financial challenges that, of course, you would have heard about that has been communicated to all boards in the province and, of course, ours as well. So let me start by thanking you, and I always do that because, again, the work that each and every one of you and your teams do is absolutely necessary. I know you've heard me say that, and I say it with all great sincerity. I know that the focus of our work, our collective work, is on our students' achievement and well-being. I know that when staff is working in classrooms with our students, they get to have a front row seat to the work that we hold as most important. But that doesn't mean those of us who may have seats a few rows back are any less important. It simply means that we have to provide the responsive service that allows the conditions to be created so that every possible focus we can have on our students and their success can be there. So the conditions that we create, everyone in this room, and I know some of you are very close to the classroom because of the work you do, and others of us would be very far from the classroom. But that's really not the point of my message. My point is that regardless of where you serve in the organization, I'm grateful on behalf of all our students and their families for how you personally and collectively are creating the conditions for the kind of service that's required for our students. So thank you for that. I'm also grateful because I have come before you on a number of occasions and said, we've got to work through bureaucratic structures and systems that are perceived by the people we serve as slow, as inflexible, as policy-driven. And though I've always said policy is important, sometimes when something doesn't make sense, we have to call it. And what I'm appreciating, because at my seat, I get to see policy changes and procedural changes. I get to hear about things that are different because of the kind of work you are all doing together. I am actually starting to hear from principals, for example, a level of responsiveness. We're not always relying on email, thank goodness. We are picking up the phone and building relationships. There is somebody who is responding when a need emerges at some or one of our admin offices. That's part of the significant service excellence work we're doing. And for those of you who are a part of our service excellence work in a formal way through our service improvement teams, thank you for being the first out of the gate on that. Because what we're basically saying is, every single team can learn and grow. Every single team, no matter how effective you are now, can be better. The way in the TDSB we believe we can be better is when we do that work collectively, not individually. Though we all have expertise in this room, and we bring that expertise to work every day, it's when we work collectively that we can be even better. So I'm going to continue to invite you to assist us to be better. One of the things I appreciate this year is that we have been very diligent, the members of my team working with your executive to meet on a monthly basis to discuss any and all issues that emerge so that we as a system are supporting your work. I've appreciated those meetings immensely because what it has allowed for me is to actually get a better understanding of what the system has to pay attention to. So I want to thank your executive on your behalf, but I also want to thank your executive on behalf of the entire system because once again, it is that type of collaboration, the willingness to share insights and ideas that allows us to realize when something actually needs to be changed. So I invite you to continue to share your voice and your insight with your executive so that those monthly meetings continue to be as effective as they have been. I also want to speak about this concept of focus. You'll recall 3.5 years ago when I arrived in TDSB, January 2016. It's hard to believe it's 3.5 years. Don't look at the pictures. I look older. This place makes you tired sometimes. Sometimes I do look and I say, how did this happen? Anyway, life happens. What can I say? I still have good energy. But 3.5 years later, I realized that I started with a clear mandate from all of our staff, which is, we are being pulled in too many different directions. And we need our board to understand that we require strategic focus. We cannot just keep being pulled in so many different directions. And we collect data in a lot of different ways. But one of the things I can say loudly and clearly is that everywhere I go in the system, we are understanding our commitments. We're understanding our commitments to shared leadership. We can do better, but I'm seeing evidence that we get it. We're honoring each other's expertise and experience. We're creating space for that experience and expertise to influence, and it's not simply a hierarchy of who sits in the top chair. And for someone who holds that formal position, I hope I'm modeling that it's not simply about a hierarchy of power, because that's not how we lead. It is not a hierarchy of position, because that is not acceptable. It is about a shared leadership model where though some of us hold more responsibility in a formal way, it doesn't in any way negate that which every one of us brings. Shared leadership. Number two, and this is what I appreciate about the service excellence work. We don't get better unless we learn something new. We have to be a learning organization, and I've said that every single time I've spoken to you. If we are not actually learning something new, explicitly connected to whatever it is you're focusing on in terms of improvement, then the practice isn't going to change. The outcomes aren't going to change because we haven't actually learned anything new to input that new learning into our practice. As a learning organization, which I hope we are in every department, in every school, is a model for our students, because when we learn something new, we've got to do something with it. So that second commitment in our vision is about being a learning organization. And I'm hoping as you're hearing me speak, you are thinking about some of the things that you have learned most recently, that you've applied to your work, and now your work is actually different. If you haven't experienced that, I'm going to invite you to consider that. And by the way, learning doesn't always have to mean going someplace to a conference or a meeting. Sometimes, and I'll use an example from me, is learning is I spend a little time on Twitter every day. Not everybody loves it, but I have to admit I'm finding it very useful. I scroll through and find some of the people that I follow who oftentimes include a link to an article, a link to a website, a link to a video. I try to do at least one thing a day. And it changes me because it takes me out of my comfort zone, the way I always do things, allows me to reflect on something different that then can impact my practice. I hope that in your own teams and departments, that concept of learning is front and center. And lastly, is the importance of focus. In the schools, we talk about the equity that drives the achievement and well-being. In the department, we speak about the conditions of equity that drive whatever improvement your team has determined is required. Our equity work in the last couple of years has gone to some really significant, important, and uncomfortable places. We are challenging issues of oppression and racism in our system. We're not there yet, but we're calling it. We're naming it. We're struggling through it. And part of what we're doing in that struggle is also trying to help each one of us reflect upon our own experiences, our own bias, the barriers we may have created individually and collectively, and what impact that might have on those whom we serve. But again, as I'm speaking, I hope you are resonating with the fact that there is a focus on your team or in your department to be more effective, that you're learning in order to make that improvement a reality, and lastly, you're celebrating successes and outcomes when the change takes place. So that's the vision that you've heard me speak about for years. It has not changed. What lastly has changed is our board has passed a multi-year strategic plan. Last May, we are now in the process of aligning our budget drivers to that multi-year strategic plan. The multi-year strategic plan speaks about transforming student learning, creating a culture of well-being for staff and students, aligning our resources effectively to our goals, ensuring equitable access to the programs our students need, and developing partnerships and relationships so that we can do this work effectively. Now, beneath those high-level pillars are lots of action plans, which I'm not going to go into today. But what I'm happy about in relationship to our board is that I said to the trustees a number of years ago, if we don't land on a focus that you allow us to follow, we can never improve because there's too much on our plates. Now that we have a multi-year strategic plan, those of you who ever pay attention to a committee meeting or a board meeting, because they're televised, I wouldn't expect that you need to, but the popcorn would be helpful if you do have a chance sometimes, is that I oftentimes say to the board, that's not what you've asked us to focus on. And what I have found is our board has become very respectful of realizing that that is true. And I, as the director, hopefully you in your roles, are not feeling as pulled in as many different directions as we could be without that particular focus. Let me now speak specifically about the times we're in now, and why the multi-year strategic plan is so key as we are clearly in a time of economic challenge. I'm never somebody who likes to speak about things in cynical or pessimistic ways, so you're not going to hear that today. But I'm also quite realistic as well. And one of the things that you would have heard from our government since they were elected last summer is that they believe that Ontario needs to be more efficient. And you would have heard that the dollars that we are spending need to be adjusted because the deficit, according to our government, is simply one that cannot exist. Now, we won't have a political discussion today regarding exactly what was being communicated in our most recent budget announcement, but I will speak specifically to education because over the last month, we have been told, and we have now stated publicly through the board, that we are needing to find approximately $54 million. That is a funding gap at this moment. And those of you who've been around TDSB for a long time would know that anytime we are in need of dealing with a funding gap of that magnitude, it's not the kind of situation that you rectify by simply stopping this or that. You actually have to look more structurally at what is it that we're doing that might be costing those kinds of dollars, so that any change we propose to the board could actually take us to a place where we have a balanced budget as of June 30th. As of June 30th, the law suggests that we must have a balanced budget, and that's something that I doubt will change. So we are now in the process of trying to get to June 30th and deal with the $54.4, give or take, million. What I appreciate is we anticipated a challenging budget year, which is why the drivers that have been created for the budget process are so very significant. The drivers are the guideposts that staff will use to create a draft budget by May 13th. Those drivers were worked on in January and February, were sent out to our community, staff included, in March. We received 15,000 responses to those drivers 1st of April, and our finance committee actually passed those drivers the other night. They're going to board tonight, assuming that they pass, which I have no reason to believe they won't. They become the guideposts for our draft budget. And some of the things in those drivers won't surprise you. Student success is top of the list. Early years, very much a priority. We set the right foundation, the trajectory is a positive one. Differentiated support to schools, which means that not every school is alike, not every need is the same, and we have to figure out a way not to provide the same to every place. And Indigenous education, under Truth and Reconciliation, it's not just about Indigenous peoples or those who self-identify, it's about all of us who are treaty people as we understand it, which means that even though there is a colonial structure called the school board, which is governed by the Education Act, that is not always in parallel to our commitments under Truth and Reconciliation and to the Indigenous people of this land. And so we're working closely with our Indigenous Education Center, our steering council, to continue to do good work on behalf of all of us. And not least important, parent engagement and student voice. Some of the things that we are using as the drivers don't cost money. They're about relationships. They actually don't need more budget dollars for us to work with each other respectfully and effectively, for us to engage our parents, for example, deeply, for us to be impacted by our students widely. These don't necessarily need dollars. Some of the work we need to do is about changing attitudes, changing practices, and so forth. But some of what we need does demand dollars. So for example, forgive me for missing one driver, student well-being remains very high. Many of you are engaged in the work of supporting student well-being, and our student census data would suggest that we have some really great challenges there. Obviously, that type of work takes certain human resources that must have budget dollars attached to them. Some of our service departments have dealt with decreases in budgets historically. So I'm guessing, as I look out at this room, some of you would suggest that the work that you do and the teams that you're on are already very lean, which adds to the stress sometimes in the workday. And we understand that not all departments are the same that way either when we're looking at challenges surrounding budget. So those are all things that are being considered at this time. So the plan going forward is that, as I mentioned, we will, and I'm just checking my time, good, we're perfect, I've still got 5 minutes. We will finalize the drivers tonight. We will finish school-based staffing by next week. We have collective agreement requirements that demand that we finalize school-based staffing. That means all the personnel that are in classrooms and so forth by next week, because then, of course, there are many processes that need to follow after. Staff will then take those drivers, and we will await the grants for student need, which is our dollars from the government that we are expecting around April 26th. They're not giving us a date, but we're kind of figuring, based upon meetings that we have been in, that we will find out exactly what kind of dollars we're going to be provided by the end of April. We've already been given an indication of reductions based upon, you would have heard and seen in the newspaper, the announcements of March 15th. The Deputy Minister has given directors the impression that the majority of what we needed to learn came in March, which is why you've heard me be confident about a number that we're working towards prior to receiving the grants. But the grants will solidify if all of our assumptions are correct. Maybe we'll get some good news. You never know in the way in which these types of announcements take place. So by the end of April, we'll know specifically what our grants are and what impact those grants have on our budget. Staff, senior team, will then take the next 2 weeks to finalize a draft budget that comes to the boardroom through Finance Committee on May 13th. We know that that draft budget will include some challenging points to our broader community. So our board has committed to approximately 3 evenings where they're going to be open to hearing from delegations prior to making any final decisions. And all things being equal, we will finalize the budget around the 3rd week of June. That's the plan going forward. Your executive asked me last week or the week before, so what impact might that have on the members of this organization, TSTN? And what I shared with the executive, as I share with you now, I can come before you in the way I always do, which is to provide as candid as possible the information that we have. The trouble is that I actually don't have further information regarding impact because 2 things haven't happened yet. 1, we haven't even finalized a draft budget. 2, once that draft budget is finalized, there needs to be an approval of that budget, and that would impact any other decisions going forward. Obviously, we will follow and honor and respect all terms and conditions and all collective agreements in this process. So that I certainly can give you my word on. So even though I know that the announcements of the last couple of weeks, months have caused stress for many, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that right now, wherever I go in the system, that stress is becoming real. And people are concerned about what impact it may have, and I'm certainly not ignoring that, nor am I avoiding that. But I'm also someone who tells the board every time I speak that I do not speculate. Speculation is something that I've oftentimes found causes greater harm. Speculation means that though I don't know what's going to be in the final draft budget because we are working morning, noon, and night, literally, weekends included, on that particular document, and I don't know how the board will receive it and what the final decisions will be, Speculation means that I pretend I have a crystal ball and can explicitly communicate an impact before we can. So what I can promise you, and what I can continue to promise you, is that we will always provide you the information as quickly as we can, and we promise to be as candid as you're hearing me speak now all the time. And if there are challenging decisions that need to be made, that we will work with respect and care, realizing that every one of us in this organization of TDSB believes in what we do. We are, at least in the people I've met, inspired by what we do, and we want to continue doing what we do. And certainly I and we get that. So more to come, but I will say that in these next couple weeks, where it would appear that our media continues to ramp up the challenges in front of us, every radio program, every news broadcast, and every media article I read speaks to this tension that I've just shared with you. Our goal in TDSB is to do the work in the calmest way possible, realizing that the next 2 months will probably have its challenges and its struggles, because anytime we have to make decisions that impact what people appreciate or enjoy, it's only natural that there will be stress, sometimes anger, sometimes a lack of understanding, sometimes a judgment. And all I'll be able to say, and I'll ask you to do the same, is that we have to communicate clearly what is truth and what isn't, and we have to clarify rationale. Why might we be doing something? And we have to be clear about why we have to, based upon the fact that in this particular case, the parameter is we must, by law, have a balanced budget by June 30th. And we as an organization receive our dollars from the provincial government. There are very few funding sources besides that. Yes, fundraising provides us some things, and yes, occasionally we sell some land which provides other things, but under the Education Act, we have no other generation of funds, no other tools to generate funds. And that's just the reality of working in public education in Ontario. So I'll close by saying thank you for giving me 30 minutes. My goal was to connect again with you. My goal was to remind us of our vision and our multi-year strategic plan. And my goal was to be, as I said, as clear as possible about the information we have regarding the time that we're in. I hope that my message has succeeded to do those things. I hope that your morning is a wonderful one. I'm grateful that you're here. Your organization is so important, not just for you, but for all of us. And I wish you all the very best. Thanks again, and I'm sure that we will connect again soon. Take care.